Thanks, everyone. When Jade first talked to me about coming and speaking at one of these events, she talked to me about how every month there's a theme. And she talked about some of the themes that were coming up, and she got to November, and she said November's theme is chance. And I said, great, I really want to do November. I want to do chance, because I really believe that chance or luck and creativity and success are intimately connected. And that can be hard because luck is such a mystery, right? It's like love. You can't manufacture it, you can't control it, you can't procure it. But you can do stuff that puts yourself in a place where you're more likely to receive it. You know, we can do things, or we can live our lives in a way that makes it more likely that luck will find us. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to tell two stories, one about beer and one about rum, just to go with the theme. And they're stories about kind of projects that I've been involved in that have been the product of luck. And then I'm going to invite you to be part of a third story, which is all about luck, which I'll tell you a bit more about in due course. The first story that I'm going to tell you is the beer story. This is back in 2009 when I was working at Colenso. We didn't have a beer account, and we really wanted one. And we were pestering DB to give us some of their business, and they were with another agency. And eventually they said, okay, we give in, we'll give you something to work on. And they gave us the most horrible product in their whole portfolio, which was Export Gold, which they had pretty much given up on. So this beer had been in decline for 10 straight years. They had spent $11 million on 8 different campaigns to try and arrest those declines, and nothing had worked. And so they said to us, well, if you really want, you can have a go before we put this thing out to pasture. And I can remember at the time when we were given this brief, we said, yes, okay, we'll give it a go. I can remember at the time lots of people in the industry saying, you know, well, they'll hate getting that brief, you know, that's just a total curse, total hospital pass. And we chose not to look at it like that. But at first it did seem like it was going to be pretty hard. So I did the first thing that I wanted to do as the planner was go and find some people who really loved this beer and try and find out what they loved about it, and maybe we could build, you know, maybe we could help this beer out by understanding that. And I enlisted a research recruitment company to find us some men who really liked Export Gold somewhere in New Zealand, and they couldn't find any. They could find people that drank Export Gold because it was on special or it was the only thing there or whatever, but they couldn't find anyone who liked this beer. And through that process, what we found was this beer had no masculinity, it had no kind of brewing credentials, and it had no story. It had no kind of, you know, it had no great story, and all great beers have great stories. And but this one, DB had told us this beer was invented in the 1980s by the marketing department, and it was just it really didn't come from any kind of great brewing kind of story. So anyway, we set to work with this unenviable task of trying to breathe some sense of story and credibility into Export Gold. And along the way, one day I was at DB and I bumped into a guy whose name is Doug Banks, and Doug is the head brewer at DB, and he's worked there for 40 years, or probably 44 years now. And I got talking to him just purely by chance, and I said to him, I'm working on Export Gold, and you know, they tell me it's a beer that was made in the 1980s by the marketing department. And he goes, what? That's not true. Come with me, young man. I'll tell you the real story. DB Export has an amazing story. And he told me a story that no one else in his company knew, not even the CEO at the time. He said, DB Export was created by a man called Morton Coates. Morton Coates was the founder of DB. And Morton came from a long line of brewers. His great-grandfather was a master brewer in one of the main brewing regions in Germany. His grandfather was one of the first people to bring brewing to New Zealand in the 1800s. His father opened the main trunk line brewery in Taihape in the early 1900s. And in around 1917, he was struck down in an influenza epidemic, and he had to hand the running of the brewery down to his son Morton, who was 15 at the time. So Morton took over the running of the brewery at 15. And he turned out to be a kind of beer brewing and beer business genius. Built up the Taihape main trunk line brewery, sold it, moved to Auckland, built the brewery at Waitemata, the Waitemata brewery where DB remained to this day. Built that, built it up, made DB into a big success. And then in the 1950s, the government at the time introduced something called the Black Budget. Now the Black Budget was a punitive tax regime which taxed certain items at a much higher rate in an attempt to bring more money into the government coffers. One of the things which they taxed at a high rate was imported beer. Now at the time we made pretty good beer in New Zealand, but we didn't make the best beer in the world like we do now. And Morton thought, this is an outrage. Now the best beer in the world has been taxed at a rate where common New Zealand men can no longer afford it. And he said, blow this is completely unfair. But I know what I could do. If I were the first person to brew the best beer in the world here in New Zealand, then the government couldn't tax it, and New Zealanders would be able to drink the best beer in the world for a fair price. So he set about brewing the best beer he'd ever brewed. And he called the project Export because he wanted it to be able to hold itself anywhere in the world. And he got busy. And 2 years later, he brought this beer out, and sure enough, it was the first New Zealand beer to win Best Beer in the World in any class at the World Brewing Awards in 1958. And so he achieved his kind of goal of being the first brewer to do this and putting the best beer in the world back in reach of the common New Zealand beer drinker. And Doug's telling me this story, and I'm like, holy fuck, this is like the best beer story that there ever was, and nobody knows about this except for Doug and now me, and I'm like, man, this is just, I've so struck gold with this. This is amazing. And anyway, so I said to Doug, so that beer was the best beer in the world in 1958, and Doug goes, no, that beer is completely different. Because what happens over the years, we play with the recipe and we conform to regulation changes and taste changes and all this kind of stuff. And this beer bears very little resemblance to the beer that was brewed in 1958. So I said to him, could you brew us the beer like it was in 1958? And he said, I think so. And he walked over and he brought out this big book, which he opened, dusted off and looked at the recipe for this original beer. And because Doug's a kind of beer brewing, lifer, he could look at the recipe and he could understand what that beer might taste like when he made it. So he looked at it and he said, oh, that'd be quite nice actually, a bit like a modern craft beer. So I said, that sounds good. And I said to him, could you make some? And he said, yeah, I could make some. Give me 6 weeks. So we left him to it, and 6 weeks later he came into the agency with his first batch of the original 1958 brew for us to try, and it was awesome. And we kind of reasoned at the time, this beer has this amazing story which no one's ever heard. So we need to go and tell that story, but wouldn't it be even better if we could allow people to experience that story by serving them this original brew so they understand, they really understand where it all came from. And wouldn't it be great if we took the packaging that the beer was in 1958 and found the same old label and the same old bottle and put it in an ice box with the story on the side and allowed people actually to relive this history in a really authentic way through a product rather than through an advertising campaign. And so that's what we launched. And within about 6 months of that launching, DB Export got back up to the market share level that it was at in the late 90s when it was at the peak of its success, after 10 years of being in decline. And for me, this I think taught me a couple of things about luck. One is that the shittiest briefs, the hospital passes, right, are so often the things that have gold in them, you know. And if you can kind of embrace that stuff, I look back on all the stuff that I'm most proud of, and so often it's stuff that started out looking like it was no opportunity. And I think like if you can frame your mind that those things that look like no opportunity to everyone else are often the best places to find the best stuff, then that really helps. And secondly, coming across meeting Doug purely by chance and hearing that story, you know, there's kind of, you never know where it's going to be, you know. I think people kind of often look at creativity or strategy and they presume there's a kind of a clear process to get to an answer. And there sort of is in some ways, but I kind of think it's often a little bit more like archaeology than anything, right? You know you're looking for treasure, and you kind of know where to start looking, but you actually don't know what you're going to find, and you don't know exactly where you're going to find it, and you just have to go and dig around, and that process, you know, at some point yields something great. The second story I'm going to tell is a story about rum. Back in late 2009, I met Roger Holmes, who's at the back there, and Calvin at the front here, and we got together with another guy called Jamie, and Roger and Jamie were starting this rum company called Stolen, and they asked Calvin and I to help with the design and with the branding and all that stuff. And so Calvin and I have been part of the advisory board and shareholders and involved with the company since the start. And it's been, I don't know if you know about Stolen, but you might have had some in your coffee this morning, and it's a New Zealand rum company with premium rum made in Trinidad, and now sold to the world. And the first couple of years were really awesome, and then this thing happened in the middle of 2012 where Roger spoke to this guy whose name is Rudy Ruiz, and he's the head of a company called Southern Wines and Spirits in America, and they're the biggest distributor of wines and spirits in the American market. And Rudy said, "I love your brand and I love your products, but here white and gold rum are flat sales-wise," and we had white and gold rum products. "What's going off in America is spiced rum. And if you could bring me a spiced rum concept that's really interesting, then I'll help you launch into America." And this is kind of like a really massive golden opportunity, right? Because the spiced rum category in America is 50 times the size of the entire New Zealand rum market. So it's a pretty good opportunity, right? So Rudy says, "I'll help you launch into America," and he said, come up with a concept that blows me away. You've got 10 days. So we talk on the phone, and it's like, fuck, what are we going to do? And anyway, as chance would have it, I had this kind of week where I had nothing to do, and I was stuck in China, and I just left a job that I really hated, and I had a week with nothing to do, and so I kind of said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it in China." And so we started this process, this very kind of quick process, looking for a concept and a territory to kind of, I don't know, build a completely new spiced rum out of. So where we started, this whole Mad Men thing of drinking in the morning, right, which we all love. It's kind of, everyone watches Mad Men and goes, isn't it just such a great thing to drink at 11 o'clock in the morning? But we thought, you know what, no one's made a spirit that's supposed to be drunk in the morning. And wouldn't it be really interesting if we were the first people to make a spirit to be drunk when you weren't supposed to drink it? And that felt like a sort of interesting place to go. And then we thought, well, what would such a thing taste like if you made that? And we'd seen this movie, Coffee and Cigarettes, right? Which is, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Jim Jarmusch film, and it's a really, really awesome movie. And it sort of just explores this ultimate kind of daytime narcotic combo of coffee and cigarettes, and the conspiring and the conversations and all that stuff that goes around coffee and cigarettes. And we kind of thought, wouldn't it be, we looked through the ingredients that you could spice rum with, and one was coffee and one was tobacco. And we thought, wouldn't it be completely mad to have a product called coffee and cigarettes? And anyway, so we got excited by it, and Kelvin did some visuals, and it started to come together. We went to Rudy, and 10 days later, and we said, okay, we've got this thing called coffee and cigarettes. And we really didn't know how this was going to go, right? Because it's a tiny bit out there, and especially sort of at the time when you're dreaming up these things and don't know whether you've sort of, gotten ahead of yourself. And anyway, Rudy says, I love it. It's awesome. Go away and make the liquid, and if the liquid works, then we'll go with it. So then Roger went away and made the liquid, and the liquid is amazing. And so went back to Rudy, and he loved the liquid, loved the product, loved the story, and he said, yes, let's go. And so last year we launched into the Miami market, test marketed in Miami. That went really well, and now we're in LA and New York with coffee and cigarettes, with a chance of cracking the biggest rum market in the world. And then along the way, we had, that's it by the way, along the way, we ran into a bit of bad luck. Australia said, we want that too. They got excited by it after America got excited about it, said, we want it too, but you can't call it that. In Australia, their regulators said, no, can't call it coffee and cigarettes. You have to call it something else. And we kind of went, oh man, okay, well we can't really call it something else because we're weird to call one product something in some place and then something different in another place. And so what should we do? And then the answer ended up being, we kind of thought, okay, what if we just scribble out that bit on the label? Because now there's internet, and so everyone will see the American product and they'll know what's under the scribble. And so if we put that into Australia, then we're not really calling it coffee and cigarettes, but we don't have to call it something else. We can kind of get around their stupid rules. So, Khan, could you press the play on the video? Could you make the video go? Or just click on it. Yeah, that's it.
Hit it! So why is it got to be so damn tough?
And so there is the American product and the Australian product, and now this is crossing out the label as part of the legend of, stolen and doing things we shouldn't and getting away with it and all that kind of stuff. And that was sort of, one of those moments where you go, man, something that's a bit of bad luck that goes wrong is so often a springboard to something else which is, which turns out to be an amazing thing in its own right. And I think that's another, being able to identify when things go wrong, being able to find the opportunity in those moments is a really powerful thing to do. Clap for Kelvin and Roger as well, by the way, who... and that having a resilient attitude that turns bad luck into good is actually one of the characteristics that an English psychology professor called Richard Wiseman found that lucky people tend to exhibit. So this professor did a study in the 1990s of luck, of people who are lucky and people who are unlucky. He got a big group of each together and he studied them to see if lucky people exhibited certain characteristics that unlucky people didn't, and to sort of see if you could, find a way to teach people how to be more lucky. And so he did all his research and he found that yes, indeed, there were characteristics that lucky people had in common, and you could teach people how to be lucky. And he wrote his book, The Luck Factor, and he actually runs workshops teaching people how to be more lucky, which I find really fascinating. And I read the book and I thought, this is fantastic. What he boiled it down to, he said, lucky people generate their own fortune via 4 basic principles. They are skilled at creating and noticing chance opportunities. They make lucky decisions by listening to their intuition. They create self-fulfilling prophecies via positive expectations. And they adopt a resilient attitude that transforms bad luck into good. Those were the 4 characteristics that tended to unite all lucky people. So I read his book and I heard about his courses teaching people how to be more lucky, and I thought, that's really awesome. But as a grown-up person, it's so hard to actually, change the way that you look at life or the way you behave or whatever. But when you're a kid, it's really easy to develop habits, right? And I thought, if you could teach children anything, wouldn't the most amazing thing to teach them be how to be lucky? And so this is like my experimental stage of my talk today, where I thought, like, it would be awesome to teach kids how to be lucky. And if you could put these principles that he's got in his grown-ups book into a children's story that parents could read their kids, then wouldn't that be a really interesting way to help kids learn how to be lucky? So I've written a story. And this is a little bit nerve-wracking. It's a draft, but I really believe that this would be a really good thing to do. And so I'm going to read you the story, and then if anyone wants to get involved, if anyone else believes in it or likes it and wants to kind of help make it happen, we're going to need designers and illustrators and to get it published and marketed and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to read you the story, and then if you like it and you want to be involved, then you can let me know. By the way, this is the first and only children's book I've ever written, so if it's shit, just go easy. It's called The Boy and the Lemon. Actually, this is the only visual I have so far. You'll have to use your imagination. So here goes, The Boy and the Lemon. Way, way out in outer space, where asteroids float and comets race, upon a planet never found, a lemon tree grew upside down, and off one branch far from the ground, a single lemon ripe and round fell from that tree, past stars, the moon, then satellites, then clouds, then soon. That lemon fell toward the earth, where people gawked its giant girth. A lemon larger than a bus, more jumbo than a jumbo, just enormous. This great big fruit must have fallen from a giant world, and now toward our world it hurled. Till sure enough, it came to crash into the house of one Jack Nash. Now, having heard the thwack, young Jack came running from his room out back to see this far-out fruit attack. "A lemon," cried his mother. "Oh, what will we do? Where will we go?" But even though his mother's woe persisted, young Jack even so felt sure this wasn't such a blow. In fact, this funny fruity thing might somehow along with it bring the chance to have a fruity day, one like no other, finding ways to have somebody rid this place of citrus fruit from outer space. "Mother, look," said Jack, "I'm not so sure it's time to lose the plot. In fact, I think we could have fun as we have our bad luck undone." And with a grin, Jack set about, looking up and staking out those who'd come to figure out and tout just how to have a lemon cleared away 24/7. With his worried mum in tow, Jack dashed and darted to and fro and high and low, getting to know a multitude of marvelous giant fruit removalists. First, Glob the giant, mighty strong, whose hulking arms were twice as long as Jack himself, and for a song, the giant Glob would lift that fruit up off the roof and distribute its rind and juice to some place far, perhaps Myanmar or Qatar. Secondly was Dangerous Dwight, who specialized in dynamite. He said, "I'll serve that lemon right, sit tight, wait till you see the sight of your great lemon by my means blown into smithereens." Third and last was Magic Max, who turned to that mother of Jack's, said, "I make lemons disappear without a trace into thin air. How does that strike you, my dear?" And then, as if to prove his point, he pointed to her purse of coins, and with a wave he filled it fat and said, "Just pay with some of that." 3 brilliant choices Jack had found, and which had made his mother proud and less distressed about their plight, to have collected in their sights 3 ways to have this thing put right: giants, wizards, dynamite. But as they went about their choosing, little Jack found himself musing. Staring out into the crowd, he saw somebody standing out for no particular good cause. He hadn't claws or freaky flaws, but something of him gave Jack pause, a hunch that couldn't be ignored, that made Jack go and say hello and tell his tale blow by blow. A lemon, Jack said, fell from space and found its final resting place upon our house, he told the man, who stood and listened and began to smile as he learned the tale. A glinty eye, he said, today'll be a day that you remember like the 25th December. That'll be smoother when it's in book form. You're in luck, young Jack. I know just what to do to make it so. Jack, of course, to be polite, apologized to Max and Dwight and Glob and took his mother's hand and introduced her to the man. I didn't catch your name, Jack said, to which the man said, call me Red. I'm pleased to meet you, Mrs. Nash. Now let us dash, for in a flash, I'll fix your giant lemon fix. I'll fix it with the best of tricks. Once home, Red made a speedy start, making use of carts of parts and working hard with all his heart. But whatever he had in mind remained entirely behind, a veil of mystery until, finally, he yelled, Jack, will you come and tell me what you think? To Jack's surprise, with a wink, Red smiled and handed Jack a drink. What's this? Asked Jack, feeling confused at why the lemon hadn't moved. Just taste it, Jack. Taste what I've made. Jack did, and it was lemonade. Delicious lemonade, the best that Jack had ever tasted, zesty, sweet and cool. Old Red confessed, I've done it, Jack. Feathered your nest with lemonade at your behest. Now go ahead, be my guest. Use this little tap to pour and drink until you can no more. And so the giant lemon stayed, a way-out gift from outer space. What seemed a grim and dreadful case was really lucky, truly great. So Jack, his mum and all his mates forgot the broken roof and rafters and house full of fun and laughter, drank happily ever after. So if you want to help, give me a call. Thank you very much.